me today are enthusiastic Deathwatch and AdMech players. Less so recently, because I think anybody who knows anything at this point does kind of know they've not been doing great. But we thought we'd sit down, we'd talk about sort of why we think they're struggling, the changes they've kind of gone through, and then the changes we think that could really sort of help lift them out of the kind of bottom tiers that they're currently sitting in. James, if you want to take a second, just kind of introduce yourself, your AdMech days and what they were.
The glory days, that's what they were.
Yeah.
No, so I kind of picked up AdMech quite early on, and played them for about a year solidly. And as soon as the codex hit, it was pretty much AdMech days for about a year, up until I think LGT 2019. Hard to remember before the COVID years.
The forgotten times.
But yeah, no, I did very well there. Won all 5 games, and then they got hit with the absolute nerf bats of all nerf bats that have ever happened.
You thought, you know what, something else instead.
And then I picked up Necrons, and here we are.
Yeah, so if I talk a little bit about me and Deathwatch, Deathwatch have always been my main army. They were the first army I started collecting. Absolutely love them. At this point, I've probably got, I don't know, like 8,000 points of the things. I've got all the sort of unique stuff, and it makes me really sad that at the end of the day, right now, they are really bad. And I think there's a whole group of reasons for that, and I'm going to run through them in a bit more detail later. And I really do hope that, I know between sort of the rumours of 10th edition, we've got time for kind of one more balance pass. I hope Deathwatch get something, because right now there's just kind of no reason to play them over other Space Marines, which is a bit of a shame, really.
Yeah, and I think one thing that kind of obviously both factions struggled with is they had 2 incredibly powerful Army of Renowns that they can no longer take now.
Yep. Yeah, as I said, I'll go into it a bit more later, but I definitely think that's part of, especially with Deathwatch and AdMech, is why they're struggling. And I think it's important to sort of mention, we're not saying these armies have no play, because that's not true. There are still some people doing very well with these armies. I know AdMech won a GT size event, either this week or last week.
Within the last month. Yeah, really.
Yeah. And I know there's a couple of Deathwatch sort of diehards still rocking the name. I know, I think it's Michael Klangerby over in Sweden, running at Games of Westeros, was regularly coming like top 3. But even he, at this point, I think this weekend, Game of Westeros, he came, I think, 8th, which is, still very good at a 40-person GT running Deathwatch, in my opinion. But it's not the first, second, and thirds he was getting before. So let's just go on to talking about AdMech first, just kind of in full. So James, if you kind of, AdMech's an army that's gone through a lot of changes, both ups and downs. If you want to kind of talk to us about what some of those nerfs were, and then obviously tell us about the history of those nerfs, because a lot of them have now been reverted, right?
Well, yeah. So this is, I mean, this is kind of the crux of what I want to talk about. Really, is it's really strange. They had all these nerfs. Those old nerfs got reverted when Arcs of Omen launched, and they're still performing poorly. I think they're a 41% win rate this season.
I think their season win rate is like 41%, something like that.
And the glory days, I think they were rocking over 60, which was just
it was equally outrageous, but for a different reason.
I mean, you know, and I think that the progression of nerfs and kind of the reversal of them has kind of been they've kind of mirrored each other. You know, firstly, the Iron Striders and Dragoons lost core, and then they got a points nerf, and then the Lucius Dogma couldn't stack with cover, so you couldn't have your 2-up Scutari kind of basic troops running around.
Yeah, your 8-point/10-point veterans running around with their 2-up save, going, "Oh, shoot me, I don't care."
And then consistently got more points nerfs. And then I think that the real kind of icing on this nerf cake that we're building here is they changed the way CP works. So you no longer got your 12 CP up front. You got your 6 CP to start with, and then you got 2 CP a turn thereafter. Now for AdMech, who spend, you know, I mean, I was spending 7 pre-game CP on my list before they changed this. Can't do that now.
Yeah,
especially when you
there's different
wanna
armies. Oh, go on.
no, but especially when 2 or 3 of the strats you want to use in the first turn cost 2 CP.
Yeah, exactly.
Even with the Holy Order reductions, you're still spending 3 or 4 CP to try and pick up some of those key units of the opponent's army.
Yeah, and I mean it's definitely why the whole change from 12 CP at the start to 6 CP and 2 around. Don't get me wrong, is a great idea, and I think it's from everyone who said they hated it at the start, taking the time, and it can now, you can pretty much say without doubt it was a good change. But I think it does definitely impact different armies differently. Like their AdMech is the top example of an army that wants to spend the lion's share of its CP before the game has even started, so that it's got those kind of buffs throughout the game. And when you just don't have that CP to spend, it's not like say you lost a CP in as a Space Marine faction, you can't use Transhuman for a turn. That's fine. As AdMech, as I think you said, the list you used to run spent what 7 CP pre-game.
Yeah, there was 2. There was a relic and a warlord trait on the large 10-man Rustalker unit. There's a warlord trait on the Skatara Marshal, a relic on him, and then it was a relic and warlord trait on one of the tech priests, and then a relic on the other one.
Yeah, I mean these aren't sort of. I mean, don't get me wrong. One the razor, the sonic razor thing was a gun, but a lot of these it was amazing, but it was a gun. Whereas a lot of these kind of relics and stuff you're handing out are buffs, so they're an ability that you're using 5 times for 1 CP that you just don't have anymore. So it's worse than just losing like a one-off transhuman or something, which is what you'd basically be losing if you were Space Marines.
And to do some of the AdMech kind of this was a lot. This kind of my time playing AdMech was pre being able to take all 3 faction secondaries. One of the key Skatara ones that was so critical was I forget the name, but it was the Skatara Warlord trait that allowed you to do actions and shoot. Now you could put that on a 20-man Skatari squad, shoot something, raise your banner, do your retrieve battlefield data, or I think Nakama data it was back in the days. Still score those secondaries, but be able to use the unit to its full,
and then stack your million defensive buffs from your other CP like spend pre-game, and you would go, cool, I'm going to lose these 20 Skatari, but it's going to take most of your army to do it. So like,
and they are only toughness 3 with a 4-up armor save normally.
Yeah, which is it is worth knowing though. They do now have that their bionic save went from a 6-up to a 5-up army wide. But it's as you said, when you are just a toughness 3 body, if you just drown them in bolt guns, eventually they're going to start going through.
That's it.
Yeah. So if we want to touch on, obviously, one of the things we mentioned in the intro was the Army of Renowns basically going away. There was that document that more or less said from 2023, most of the Army of Renowns, the old books like that, kind of tying up loose ends and just putting a hard deadline on you cannot use these things anymore. A lot of it was just random. A lot of it was narrative jank and stuff like that. But I think specifically for AdMech and Deathwatch, the 2 armies of renown they had, what the AdMech one called? Skatari something. Yeah, that was it. Made so a lot of the Army of Renowns, they take units that are either bad or okay and make them more okay. But a lot of
this was the thing for Skatari. It made units and models that were good, some of the best things in the codex, and made them just ludicrously strong.
Yep. When it first came out, it added 2 points onto the model, and what I can't remember what the other limitations were.
Adds 2 points onto the model. You get extra attack on all your Vanguard.
Yeah.
And then your Rangers counted as being in cover. I can't remember if it was a stationary or not.
And you ignored morale.
Your Vanguard. No, that was it. You ignored morale on one, and your Vanguard.
You ignored.
Yes, and they ignored blast.
Oh yeah, they didn't ignore morale. It was ignore blast. That was it.
Yeah.
Which was massive when you're running around with your big 20-man units, because you can just start shooting blast into them, especially because this was back when. Was this before? Was this after?
Aldari were running the Doom Cannon no line of sight builds. You had Plasma Receptors still running around. You had the old guard lists with the battle cannons.
Just basilisks and battle cannons, and so just getting blast on all of them, you would have just ripped them apart. But as soon as you can't, it was the worst. I hated it.
Yeah,
I absolutely hated those days.
I think you played the army once and said, you know what, no.
I played once. I played you once as Deathwatch. Got killed before I even really had a chance to cross the board, and went, well, that was fun.
Yeah. And I think this Skantari veteran cohort really gave AdMech an ability to perform very well. And as the new codexes came out, and with a few of the nerfs they had, their teeth really loosened to the point where they were relying on the Skantari cohort to perform, rather than it being this kind of extra layer that made them even stronger. It was the crutch that was keeping the army held up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a case of like sort of death by 1,000 cuts, where the nerfs right at the end, they were a big nerf. I'm not going to say they weren't, but before that, it was lots of like, you take away core, you add a couple of points here, you do this there. None of them were huge, but when you add them all up together, there's just not enough left, basically.
And obviously, the strongest builds were the kind of 3 to 6 plane builds.
Yeah.
You took, I think, 3 Archaeocopters and 3 Fusiliers, or like some of which, or Fusilar, 3 Archaeocopters, 2, a combination of up to 6.
Yeah.
And then they changed the mechanics of the game where you couldn't take more than a couple of flyers.
Yep.
That list died overnight, and it wasn't even close. You could no longer run that list.
Yeah.
And as that was one kind of became the AdMech list and the one that could perform very well, you then had to switch, and then they got hit with a massive points increase on almost across the board.
Yep.
I think the Cerberus Raiders went up, almost 40%. It was crazy points.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it was when your list was kind of just spamming the like Skitari hordes, where you used to have like at least 60 Skitari bodies just running around on the board. So even if you increase Skitari by 2 points, which is pretty sure what they did,
I think so.
That's 120 points. Like, it's massive. And I think that was kind of the issue. Although the AdMech Codex does have quite a lot in it, there's a lot in it that maybe less so now, but especially when it came out. The Skitari stuff, amazing. The Cult Mech stuff in general, kind of bad. You just didn't run it.
But it was none of it had core.
Yeah.
And core was this unique mechanic they brought out to affect everything.
Yeah.
And then none of the Cult Mechanicus stuff had core. So all your Castellan robots. So your Castellan robots could get it through the Tech Priest guy that comes with them doing an action. And that didn't happen until later, or some kind of roundabout way to try and get them core.
Yeah.
And then even though they were core, they didn't get many of them. It was just such a,
Yeah. No, it's just kind of all over the place. Like, and I think they've definitely tried to fix that. Obviously, as you said, one of the changes they've made more recently is giving forgotten the name of the servitors on wheels, the other types of troops, Cataphrons.
Cataphront breaches and destroyers.
Yeah.
They got core. And then this kind of comes on to when we're going to kind of mention the suggestions to improve. That was one of my big arguments. Give Cataphrons core, and maybe that'll help.
Yeah, it was funny when we were writing the kind of the brief for this episode. You had written down a bunch of changes that you thought, oh, maybe if they do this will fix AdMech. Then we kind of looked at them and we went, hang on, they've done all this already.
Yeah. I think, inherently, it's quite a weak codex, synergistically, because you're only running Lucius and Mars, really, if you're competing. Rise has got some play. Graia might have a little bit of play. They don't add up to the raw power of Mars or the raw defensiveness of Lucius, and that's just, and everything's either so killy, you either need to be really killy yourself or really tanky.
Yeah. And I think a lot of armies nowadays can kind of do both. Like you look at things like Dark Angels that can pretty confidently do both. Being able to only do one or the other just doesn't really cut it. Or you need to be able to do one of them so well that it doesn't matter. Like Iron Hands just melt. As soon as you shoot them, they're dead pretty much. But it doesn't matter because in that first turn, they will eliminate pretty much whatever they can see and whatever they can get a bead on and anything that comes out of cover.
And I think, the rise of that, the rise we're seeing with Yunari and Aldari coming in, kind of performing very well, it relies heavily on the fact that they just take you off the table.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
What AdMech used to do, but they just cannot do that anymore.
No. And I think it's a problem of their codex. Whilst it has the depth isn't good enough to kind of flex into as things are changing. And I think, especially obviously us being sort of UK players, we play a hell of a lot on the UK TC terrain. And I think you've just got so much to hide behind that being a gun line, whilst it does still work for some, like things like Iron Hands and Dark Angels, Ravenwing, you're relying on being able to move or relying on your secondary game being so good that you hold your half of the table, score 80, 90 points, and basically say to your opponent, you need to beat me on score without coming into my half of the table, because if you do, I will kill you.
Which is why I think it's interesting that the list actually that did win recently, because he took 20 Rust Stalkers and 6 Dragoons, which obviously all totally melee options. And I do think that's probably got legs. Backed up by the usual kind of many Iron Striders.
Chickens that just delete any tank they look at.
Chickens. It's just, I mean, the guy was running 14 of them. I mean, it's,
I mean, how many you got? You had like 9 or something? Because I know you had a whole bunch of Dragoons. The Codex came out and you went, I want lasers instead.
No, I do have 9. It's 9 because I changed one of the Dragoons to a last cannon.
Yeah. So I think if we've kind of covered the units and we've kind of covered the nerfs and the changes, but I think one of the most important changes, obviously, especially since you played, was you can now take your 3 faction secondaries. So there's definitely been a big swing to the factions who their 3 secondaries are just kind of amazing auto takes. They're just better. And I think it's one of the things we were looking at sort of before this episode. We were looking at the sort of secondaries AdMech have available to them. And I mean, they don't seem bad. They seem pretty good.
I think this was surprising because we were talking about it and I was like, well, they don't have very good secondaries. And I was like, and then I went and found them and said, these are what the secondaries are. And I was like, actually, hang on a minute. These are
pretty good.
These are okay. One of them is killing, you kill units with Wall of Traits, Relics, or Vehicles over 8 wounds. Some matchups.
Three for every time you do it?
3 for every time you do it.
And can you do it more than once in a round?
Because I think it's at the end of the battle. At the end of the battle, at the end of the battle, you score 3 VP for every enemy model that is destroyed. That meets one of those criteria.
And I mean, so you're relying then on killing your opponent. So don't be wrong, it's not a great way to play the game, but there's a lot of secondaries now that basically go, I'm going to not interact with you and score points, and you have to stop me doing that rather than I have to do something to score these points. And I think there are ways your opponent...
This is it. I think that doubles down with Eradication of Flesh, which is your vehicles have to kill more stuff than you lose vehicles. So again, you're killing more stuff. And maybe that's where AdMech are performing weak. Maybe they can, because they can't last as long, because they don't have the immune to blast, or inherently the game is a lot more killy now. Maybe they're struggling to score those. Not sure. They seem like pretty good secondaries to me.
Yep. No, exactly.
The last one, you score 5 VP at the end of your turn if you control the objective marker that your opponent picks before the game, but it can't be in their deployment zone.
Yep.
So if you're running one of those missions where they've got 3 in the middle, it's one that's reachable, and if it's the end of your turn, you just have to hold it. So we kind of start the chat with, the secondaries are bad, and we kind of ended it with, actually, these seem okay.
Yeah, I mean, they seem decent. I don't know, as we'd said then, not having access to the blast, ultimately your army being a bunch of T3 guys who are most of the time going to be having a 4-up or a 5-up save. It's not hard to kill those.
No.
And especially when you've got those big 20-man units. There's so much stuff nowadays that can charge a 20-man unit and just kill all 20. Yeah. That sort of stringing them out and moving them behind walls and stuff just isn't really a viable strategy. Less so in shooting, but more in melee. The game is now so much faster. A lot of armies can pretty effortlessly cross the table, hit you in combat, kill 20 Skitarii, and do that twice in a turn. Well,
as Liam was saying with World Eaters, the speed that World Eaters now have and the ability to just pick units up.
Yeah.
8-bound can run into 20 Skitarii and pick the whole unit up without even breathing.
Yep.
When you're looking at that, and when your Skitarii are kind of a crux of your army, it's a rough place to be in. Which is why I think it's really cool that list that did win ran 1 unit of 5 Skitarii, Vanguard, or Rangers, and everything else, Sakarans or chickens.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Scutari aren't expensive. A unit of 20 is 200 points, I want to say.
No, less. It's there 160 or 8 points a model again, I think.
8 points a model again. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, they're cheap, but
9 points. 9 points a model.
so 180. So you're going to be running 3 or 4 units of 20. But the other problem you start to run into, as we said on UKTC terrain as well, you just run out of places to hide them behind, because hiding 20 dudes is not easy. You're looking at using your larger ruins, your smaller ruins, you're going to struggle, and also they're not a unit that can really do any damage in melee. So they're a unit that needs to shoot, so they need to expose themselves to shoot, and they've not got any tricks where they can kind of be like, right, I'm going to put this one model who does most of my shooting just slightly out. He's then going to die, and then the rest of the unit's hidden. The unit of 20 dudes needs to stand out in the open to shoot you. So they do struggle a bit with sort of positioning as well.
Like going with the veteran cohort, you could charge unit 20 Vanguard.
Yep.
And that unit 20 Vanguard's then coming in with, 20 attacks back, assuming you would have killed at least half the squad. And then you got the minus toughness on as well. So your unit of Marines or Eldar that's charged them, they're now toughness 3 or toughness 2. You're killing that unit back.
Yeah, punching is not bad when you've got, like, I don't know, say 50 odd swings. Like, that's pretty good. Like, it may have just been 50 strength 3 swings, but as you said, when your opponent is then toughness 2 or toughness 3, you don't really care.
So, and I think, that's kind of why AdMech's not great.
Yeah.
Or kind of what we understand as why they're not doing as well. Now, I don't know where we go from here with AdMech, because as we said earlier, 2 of the top changes I would have made was giving everything a 5+ invuln and giving some of the cult mech a bit more synergy with the Scutari side. They gave Cataphrons core, and they gave everything with Bionics a 5+ invuln.
Yep.
So they did 2 of the ones I would have loved for them to have done. There are, and I think this is where the kind of mismatched synergy of the book really comes in. Some of the really powerful warlord traits and abilities are Scutari locked, so you're never going to see mass breaches, mass destroyers, your Castellan robots. You're not going to see them because they can't be affected by the powerful abilities.
Yeah, there's definitely a thing that you could then think about adding those, either giving them the Scutari keyword or taking away the requirement of don't give them the Scutari keyword because they're not Scutari. Take away the requirement to be Scutari to be affected by those rules.
And I think kind of coupling down on that, one thing I'd really like to see is the Scutari warlord traits are the most powerful thing in the book. Being able to ignore cover, being able to do actions to shoot.
There's a reason you spend 7 CP pre-game, like.
Exactly. And because you can give them on the unit sergeants, I would love for them to change that to like a points upgrade, like the Holy Orders. Even if it was 20 points extra on your Scutari sergeant, it now gives them the ability to let a unit fall back and shoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you said, right? You make them. You make them a Scutari version of Holy Orders that can only be taken by Scutari models, but with the addendum of it can be put on a sergeant or anything with like the sergeant keyword.
Just as much as the warlord traits can now. And I think the really big swift kind of shift over there would be then you could spend 2 or 3 CP pre-game, still have your 3 or 4 game CP at the start of the game to do your enrich rounds, to do your galvanic volley fire, to do your chain taser protocols. So like you can then still perform the way you want the army to perform in the first few turns without having to suffer not having any CP to do all the utility that your army needs to perform.
Yeah, because I think it's definitely one of the, going back to just kind of the core problems of AdMech is in their heydays were the days when games were pretty much decided on turns 1 and 2. Like, how much of your opponent's list can I kill in the first turn or in my first big punch if you weren't going to do it in the first turn? But Games Workshop, to be fair to them and to their credit, they've done a very good job of steering the game away from that, making games actually play out into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th turn. Whereas AdMech have never really changed. And if they don't have this, they don't have the CP, they don't have the points to basically do that big turn 1 punch anymore. So they're just kind of anemic for the next 4 turns.
And this is the problem, you have your Iron Striders who can have AP, ignoring AP -2, and 2+ to hit, rerolling 1s. You have all of those back again, and they're not performing. They've still got a 41 seasonal win rate. I think this week they were 27%. which is, you know,
and it's what we said as well. It's 27% whilst being played in, I think it was like 50 odd games. That's not an anomaly. That's just they're not good.
That's just maths.
Yeah. But yeah, you got any other kind of thoughts on things you would add? I think we've covered your main suggestions.
Other than a complete rewrite of the book,
which just isn't going to happen at this point.
Which isn't going to happen, especially with 10th coming out around, right around the corner. Rumours, obviously.
Yeah.
I think the only further step I would take is just creating more synergy between the cult mech side and the Skitarii side. You know, do something. I mean, Caller's been so bad for so long.
Yeah,
and he's
a shame because I think in the more recent books, you look at your Abaddons, you look at your other massive named characters. It's pretty much every named character after Call they've kind of nailed. A lot of the big, like you look at your Drazars, and again, as I said, your Abaddons. They're amazing. They're the big centerpieces they should be, rather than just I'm going to stand here and give you rerolls.
But even Mortarion and Magnus, who big named characters, don't see that much competitive play. You can still take them and perform reasonably well. There have been lists that have won GTs with both of them in.
Yep.
And I cannot remember seeing a list with Call-in, and I will be happy to be wrong here, that came top 4.
Loves Call. It's just garbage.
I miss him. I haven't even picked up my new one.
No. But it would be nice to see him be good. I think that's the thing. There's so many units in the book that are really iconic. Call, your Castellan robots, and it's just a shame that they are really bad.
You just don't see them competitive.
And it's so weird because a lot of these kind of units and armies that are this bad, or not this bad, that's not fair, that struggle, it's mostly because they've been kind of ignored. Whereas with AdMech, it's weird because they've tried quite a few things at this point. They've tried changing different parts of the rules. They've tried changing individual units. And they're still just not great. And I don't really understand why.
I don't understand why they're not performing very well. I do wonder whether it's not enough people have picked them up again because other things are better.
I think it's
with Iron Hands or Eldari or Yannari than it is with AdMech. Because if it is, and people prefer playing those armies, because I won't lie, playing AdMech is you have to have a rule book and a notepad in front of you to remember every single buff you can do.
You need a big cybernetic brain.
You need a very big cybernetic brain.
But yeah, I think we've covered kind of everything I think we can cover about AdMech. I don't know if you've got anything else to add, but otherwise I think we move on to Deathwatch.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, sad to leave my back behind again, but
yeah, but that is the way of things, Mr. Necrony boy. So if we move on to Deathwatch have, as I said, always been my main army. And right up until the end of this year, when the Army of Renown became illegal, the Kill Team Strike Force, which I've always gone down as saying was one of the best, most flavorful, and also competitive rules editions they've ever made. Because to me, it made you play Deathwatch exactly how they were meant to be played. You got these big kill team blocks that you can stack your buffs on, you can spend your CP on, and suddenly they perform like Space Marines, these like big 10-man blobs that can just delete things and be unkillable.
You adored these rules.
I fucking loved them.
Enjoyed another set of 40k rules more than you enjoyed that.
I mean, several times it made me go, oh, there's this other army that I collect, their codex has come out. Shame they're not Deathwatch, though. And that happened more than once.
Or I could run more Gravis Marines.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so when that kind of finished, I did spend a good month and a half trying to make other lists, trying to make things that work. And especially then when the whole Space Marine points drops changed, and I know a lot of people were like, oh my god, Deathwatch are going to be amazing. And the small print thing that I think so many people missed was that the cost of a basic Deathwatch veteran went from, it was 19 points at the time, to 27 points. Sure, he got his free war gear, but he also went up in points by 8 points. And
I think one thing you always used to say was you wanted 5 veterans at 19 points because they were just 10 wounds.
Yep,
that was it. They didn't need.
They were 10 wounds with a chainsword and a bolt gun that could just do some semi-reliable damage, because obviously you get them to -2 and they get like 4 attacks each, 3 attacks each on the charge, with all your kind of stacking advance and charge and all that kind of stuff. So they weren't bad, but their job was to die for the other stuff in the kill team that was good. They were there to tank wounds for your Terminators when you didn't want to tank like a Dark Lance to the face or something like that, and you would just take it on a Marine instead. And then if he dies, sure, whatever, it's fine. But then as soon as you make him 27 points, sure, I can then give him I give him a Power Fist and a Combi Valor. But it doesn't matter. Don't be wrong. He now does a lot more damage, but he now costs 27 points, and his job is to die for the Terminator, who now only costs like 35. So why not just take more Terminators?
And I think, one thing we've seen with Marines, with the buffs and the stuff they've got, the two factions that have kind of really excelled, and this kind of plays into what we were saying earlier, it's can you really kill really well or, tank really well? Deathwing Terminators, really, really, really good at tanking. Iron Hands, really, really good at killing. They're the two main factions we've seen to come ahead of the Marine kind of pack, as it were. And Deathwatch don't really do either very well.
No, I mean, that's the thing, right? They've got an incredible amount of flexibility in what they can take. But like, all right, I take my 10-man unit of Terminators and it's 350 points for what used to be a 450 point unit, sure. But then I have no rules that really make those guys better. So they are basically just 10 Terminators with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. Which, don't get me wrong, is still good. But when I can take them in Dark Angels and they suddenly get transhuman and they can do the whole -1 to wound and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah.
Well, I think this was what, more so than the Skitarii Veteran Cohort, Deathwatch losing the Strike Force. I mean, the flexibility.
It's massive. It's huge.
Overnight was.
Yeah, I mean, it's for people who don't kind of know what the Strike Force did. The restriction was you could only take kill team units, characters, and then you could also take a transport for, I think it was for every kill team you took. In return, you got to basically, at the start of each battle round, you would say, right, for this turn, I'm an Ultramarine, or for this turn, I'm a White Scar. You did lose some stuff when you did that, but the trade-off for being able to go, cool, my whole army has advance and charge this turn is massive.
This is what you mean by being an Ultramarine. You got their chapter tactic across the whole army. Now, if you had a load of stuff in combat that was tied up and you really needed to fall back, I'm an Ultramarine now, I can fall back and shoot you. If you thought I need that little extra bit of reach because you're, 18, 19 inches away, I'm a White Scar now, I can advance and charge.
I can advance and charge with my bike that moves like 20, and then my jump veterans who just about follow in behind, and suddenly my unit that actually has like a 6-inch move on its basic dudes moves like 25, 30 inches in a turn, and it's just a bit nuts.
It was terrifying.
So that was, to me, was just kind of the first massive issue that Deathwatch had. As soon as you take away that kill team strike force, you are basically just Marines again. Don't get me wrong, with a lot more flexibility, but the trade-off for that flexibility is you had less sort of thematic rules to be like, your game is melee or your game is shooting, so we're going to give you rules to make you good in melee or give you rules to make you good in shooting. Deathwatch's rules were we're going to make you more flexible, which only goes so far when you're not actually then really good at anything. And I think one of the main things that then that kind of built into is Deathwatch's doctrine. For those who sort of don't know Space Marine doctrines, you've got your 3 phases, and a lot of armies will get some special rule in their kind of preferred phase that makes them better. Some like good examples. Go on, say again.
For example, Iron Hands, Devastator Doctrine, they get a reroll once and ignore the heavy penalty.
Yeah.
Makes it good at shooting.
Yep. Whereas Deathwatch's doctrine at the time was pretty good when they had Kill Team Strike Force. It was, you can choose the order of doctrines you go in. So if turn 1, your opponent moves forward, or you want to go first and you think, right, if I just hit him really hard this turn, in melee, I can maybe win this game turn 1. So you would start in the Assault Doctrine and just go all out. Was a really, really good rule at the time. The problem being it had an addendum to kind of follow along with the normal doctrines rule of you could do heavy once, you can do tactical twice, and you can do assault for 3 turns, which at the time, absolutely fine. The problem is now that Codex Warfare, it's Codex Warfare, isn't it, the secondary?
This is a secondary problem, I think.
Yeah.
There's another part to this where you can now stay in Devastator as many turns as you want. You can now stay in tactical 4 turns. Now, you can't do that as Deathwatch.
You get 1 turn to focus on what is probably, I would say, either the best or the second best secondary in the game. Because it's just every time you kill something with a heavy weapon, you get 2 points. But you have to be in heavy doctrine, which as Deathwatch, you can only do for 1 turn. So whereas most Space Marine lists are building themselves around, right, I'm just going to take as many heavy weapons as I can, and I'm going to score 15 on this secondary every time. Deathwatch just can't do that. It's just not an option. It's just not something you can do.
No.
And the trade-off for that as well, before Arcs of Omen came out, most of the Space Marines had 3 of their own secondaries. Deathwatch weren't any different in that. They lost 2 of them and kept only Cull Order, which Cull Order is not bad. It's you pick 3 unit Force Org types in your opponent's army, so like you pick elites, fast attack, and troops, and as long as you kill all of those, for each one, you get 5 points, which seems pretty decent on the tin. But the problem is when you actually then compare it to what you're losing Codex Warfare, which is one of the main reasons Space Marines are pretty good again. And then you actually compare Codex Warfare to some other other secondaries. Compare it to things like, as we said, for instance, Codex Warfare. Every time I kill something, I get 2 points with a heavy weapon. I have to kill all the elites in your army just to get 5. You compare it to Teleport Assault for Grey Knights. I'll kill 1 unit when coming out of Deep Strike, and I get 5 points. That's kill 1 unit. I have to kill all the I don't know, even if it's troops, so I have to kill 15 intercessors just to score 5 points, something like that.
And I think the kind of doubling down on that even is Arcs of Omen has opened this whole really interesting kind of list building where you can run 10 elite choices, well not 10, you get my point, or 6 fast attack choices. So you don't have to run several choices of different types because you can cram it all in one detachment now. Which means you might have to pick that one they've taken, and you're not going to kill the whole army because as we've already discussed, Deathwatch don't kill any better than a standard Marine. So you're unlikely to kill all those options. So you're going to lose 5 points.
Yep, exactly. And like, as you said, someone might have all their elites, then they've got like 2 HQs, and then they've got, I don't know, a land speeder in fast attack. Don't get me wrong, that land speeder is then an easy 5 points. Unless you take it, you explain the secondary to your opponent, and again, it's the whole thing if they can interact with their secondaries. If they just go, right, I'm just going to leave this land raider in a corner, it's going to be, I don't know, like 60, 80 points that I just don't use, and you just don't get 5 points.
Well, it's even more than that, with strategic reserves being free.
Yep.
You pick that against me, I go, right, I'm going to put my land speeder in strategic reserve till turn 3. Yep. I'll then bring it in behind a building or bring it in a corner. And that land speeder.
And then to add insult to injury, you'll go second, run it out from behind the wall, shoot something with this multi-melter and score 2 points in the last turn.
Yeah.
So they really struggle with their secondary game, which is weird as well, because obviously the whole thing I was saying about kill teams, for those who don't know, you can kind of take, or imagine all the Gravis Marines fit into one kill team, so you can take sort of 5 aggressors shielded by 5 heavy intercessors. And the important note of it is it makes all of it troops, which obviously with the new Space Marine rules of troops get sticky objectives, again, would make them pretty good. And to be fair, they're not bad when it comes to primary scoring, because there's a Warlord trait to give a unit double obsec, so you can sort of have double obsec, sticky objectives, big 10-man blobs running around, and those 10-man blobs are cheaper than they used to be. So the primary game is not bad. It's just secondaries where they kind of struggle, whereas like a lot of armies have their standard, I'm going to take these 2, score pretty well, and then I'm going to have my third that's going to have to be a bit more flexy, and it might be bad matchup dependent, whereas Deathwatch is kind of, a lot of your secondaries are going to be like that every game.
Well, that's pretty key with a lot of the factions that are doing well. You're going to say, take 2 secondaries that I'm going to get 25 points on every game. Third one, we'll take it. Maybe I'll only get 8 or 9 points on, depending on matchups. And then primary, if I can score the primary well enough, I'm going to be aiming for 70, 80 points every game. Deathwatch is really going to struggle to get those 2 secure secondaries before you even build the list, let alone once you build the list.
No, exactly. And I think sort of list building is something worth noting as well. Obviously, as I said, you've got those big kill teams, but the trade-off for that is there are some units in the Marine book that you just can't take, you just don't have access to. Namely, among those are Devastators. And you can take your kill team Deathwatch veterans, and you can give them. I don't actually think you can give them multi-melters. I know you can give them missile launchers and heavy bolters. I'm not sure if you can give them a grav cannon, but even if you can, you then don't have a signum. You don't have the ability to give one of them shoot twice, so you can't get here's my multi-melter hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s that shoots twice in the turn it comes down. So you lose that big drop pod punch that is just part of being a Space Marine nowadays, basically.
With every Space Marine list these days.
Yeah. So you lose that, and it's just before, when you had the kill team rules to kind of make these big units worth taking and make them hit hard, make them tanky, make them as flexible as you needed them to be, it was worth it. But I think now it's just not. You're not worth losing all the stuff that normal Space Marines get to trade for more flexibility, basically. And that's all you're really trading it for nowadays.
So, what would you do?
What would I do?
I mean, this all sounds horrific. I thought the anime stuff seemed, they're not actually that bad. Maybe they just need a few tweaks. Deathwatch feel like they're in a real bad place.
Yeah, I mean, the Kill Team Strike Force was keeping them alive, and it was making them do good. Don't get me wrong, it was. I think the Kill Team Strike Force is definitely probably behind AdMech's Army of Renown in its heyday. Was definitely the best Army of Renown that ever came out. As I said, both thematically and competitively.
100%, and I think competitively as a supplement that really elevated an army. It was kind of probably one of the best ones, if not the best one out there.
Yeah, sure.
But it's gone. We live in a post Deathwatch Strike Force day.
Sadly. Going back to what you said, kind of the things that I would probably change. As I said, their doctrine is not great because of the way it works, the whole limitations. I'm hesitant to say you should just give them massive sweeping buffs, because with the way Deathwatch work, being part of the Space Marine book, if the Space Marine core book then gets buffs, suddenly you can have these supplements that are just nuts because they're basically adding rules onto what's already good. So you have to be very careful.
I think we remembered that from when the Storm Shield, Stormwater days of Deathwatch, where you had as many Deathwatch.
No, to be fair, that was when they were an entirely separate book. That was when they were separate. But it's things like, obviously, back when Space Marine 2.0 first came out, and you had several other codexes that were absolutely fine. Your Ultramarines, your Salamanders, your Raven Guard were pretty good. And then you had your Iron Hands and your Imperial Fists, who just went, cool, I'm going to shoot you off the board turn 1, and there's basically nothing you could do about it.
This was at the end of 8th, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're talking a while ago, but it's just a kind of, what I'm saying is you don't want to add extra rules on top of the core Space Marine book. So I think what ultimately should happen is their doctrine should be reworked so that the core version of the doctrine is still something fairly basic. I don't really have a good idea for what it is, because you want to keep the core thing of their whole thing being about flexibility, but you need to actually give it some strength as well. So what I kind of thought, in much the same way, Dark Angels, their doctrine affects different parts of the army in different turns. Like there's the Raven Wing part, the Death Wing part, and then the Green Wing part. I don't know what the Green Wing part is, but I know there is one. In the same way, when you can buy kill team upgrades, so you sort of say, right, these guys are a Führer kill team, and what that does right now is it will give them reroll 1s to wound against certain unit types. So like a Malleus kill team gives you reroll 1s to wound against heavy support. And then you can then stack it up to get full rerolls to wound. But I think what you should do is you should add a doctrine part into that as well, where like a Malleus kill team, for example, really good at killing heavy support, uses a lot of big guns. So give it, when you're in Devastator Doctrine, give it something extra. I don't know what you would give it, but I think that's a good way to add that flexibility in, that you can also include at the list building stage, but then also flex into it during the game by changing your doctrine.
I think it's a really interesting way to go around it, because you could tailor your kill teams for specific jobs you want them to do. Yeah. And when you need that job done on turn 3, you can then stick them in a doctrine or stick them in a doctrine and get them to do their job.
Because if you could do that, that whole thing of the main part of your doctrine be choose the order would still be worth it. Because if I then go, right, turn 3, I really need my Malleus kill team to pop off, I'm going to go to heavy this turn. But the problem is now, I go, right, turn 3, I'm going to go into heavy. All right, I just get heavy doctrine for a turn. Sure, I get an extra AP, whereas like Iron Hands for 5 turns get an extra AP, reroll 1s, and ignore the heavy penalty.
This is one thing we've seen quite a lot with Deathwatch. Like, they pay quite hard for the flexibility. Yes, they can choose when they get the doctrine, but they don't get anything for it. And the kind of non-codex compliant chapters have, if you take Black Templars, they lost their special doctrine ability and got their oaths. Where Deathwatch they lost the special doctrine abilities and received nothing. And received
flexibility to do not a whole lot extra, basically.
Well, nothing really. I mean, because you still get the doctrine abilities. You just get it where they go, but you get no additional bonus when you're in any of those doctrines.
Yeah, no, you're right. So that's obviously the first thing I'd change is sort of rework how their doctrines work. The other part, obviously, with all Space Marine chapters, you've got your doctrine benefit and you've got your chapter tactic. The Deathwatch chapter tactic is not bad. It's you pick a unit type in your opponent's army, you get reroll 1s to wound against it. The other half of it is when you're fighting anything that is a Xenos, so you're looking at Eldari, Tyranid related stuff. I think Leagues of Votan nowadays. The Leagues of Votan.
They brought a new faction out that you
yeah,
can reroll.
you're damn right. You basically get reroll 1s in melee, which again is not bad. So when you're fighting, say, your Eldari list that's got like 6 fast attacks, against most of his list, you're rerolling 1s to hit and you're rerolling 1s to wound in melee, army wide, which is really good. The issue then comes up when you come up against like a tactical flexible army where they've got like 3 of every type of unit, and then they're Space Marines. So you don't get half your chapter tactic, and then the half you do get only works against like a third of their army. So whereas you look at like White Scars, who get army-wide advance and charge, plays into the way they want to play every turn, is massively useful. Instead, you get something that works. Like if you look at sort of actual tournament representation, I'd say maybe a third of lists are Xenos, the rest are Imperium and Chaos. So you're going to get it in a third of your matchups, and then even in the matchups you don't get it, your other half is going to affect maybe half your army at best.
Yeah, I think it's and this is kind of coming back to that Deathwatch Strike Force. The Deathwatch Strike Force filled that massive hole in this codex.
Yeah, because that was the thing. When you went, right, I'm going to be White Scars for this turn, you lost that reroll 1s to wound thing. So you were just trading it for whichever is the best for you at the time. And that flexibility is worth it when the flexibility you're pulling in is these super powerful rules, your advance and charge, your fallback and charge, your fallback and shoot, all that kind of stuff. But when it's, all right, I get reroll 1s a third of the time, sure, why not? So I definitely would change that. The way I'd probably go about changing it, the reroll 1s to hit in melee, in the games where you do have it, I've found really, really good. So I probably would just change it so you just get reroll 1s to hit, but it's just all the time against all factions. And still only in melee, not in shooting as well, because that would be kind of nuts.
I agree.
Yeah. The reroll 1s to wound thing, again, I think is good. And I'd be hesitant to change it too much, because if you're already getting reroll 1s to hit in melee, and then if I said, right, let's make it reroll 1s to wound against everything all the time, it would be kind of nuts. But I definitely think you need something to make it not more powerful, but just make it so you get the rule more often. Not entirely sure of how I would go about that though. That's kind of the issue.
You could maybe link it to the kill teams themselves. You know, the Malleus against any heavy support or super heavy units.
That is what it. So if I take a Malleus kill team, when I pick heavy support for my chapter tactic, so basically I pick Malleus, that gives that unit reroll 1s to wound against heavy support. If I then pick heavy support for my chapter tactic, it instead becomes full rerolls to wound, which is really good, don't get me wrong. And it was especially good because in the kill team rules, you could pick the same kill team twice, which is something you can't do anymore. So especially back in those days when most lists were running like 5 or 6 elite choices, you would run 2 anti-elite kill teams pretty much every time. They'd run into something in melee and just delete it because they had full rerolls to wound. A lot of the time they were getting +1 a hit, they'd be getting rerolls from chaplains nearby and all that kind of stuff.
So maybe the answer is bringing some of the stuff from Deathwatch Strike Force into...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be the dramatic option, and I don't know how much they would do it because it kind of loses the flavour of playing Deathwatch. If you literally took the Xenos Hunters chapter tactic, which is the reroll 1s, and just replaced it with the old rule of every turn you pick a different chapter and you become that chapter for a turn, would be incredible. I would be hesitant to make it their thing, though, because I think, in my mind, that is the reason why they removed the Army of Renown. It was fine when the Deathwatch chapter tactics themselves, sorry, not Deathwatch, the Space Marine chapter tactics were just kind of okay. They were situationally very good, but on the whole, they were just kind of okay. When a new book comes out, and if suddenly all the chapter tactics are really good, and every turn I can go, right, I'm going to pull in these super powerful rules, and then next turn I'm going to pull in these ones, it becomes a bit much.
Yeah, I do see your point.
Yeah. And I think that is ultimately the issue of Deathwatch. You want to give them this flex, because it's their whole thing, right? They're built of the Marines from different chapters, and they all kind of fight in different ways. So you want to give them these rules that let them kind of pull that thing through, but as soon as you do, it can become a bit nuts. Ultimately, that's the problem.
From a mechanical side, if you know, I know there's been suggestions out there that you should be able to do it per kill team, or you should be able to give a kill team, a specific chapter tactic, but it becomes very kind of
bookkeeping as well.
A lot of bookkeeping to keep track of what you're doing.
Yeah,
and I do feel like, and maybe we'll see this if and when 10th comes out this year, I can see them getting rid of a lot of that bookkeeping.
Yeah, no, same. Because that would be the ideal thing, right? I go, right, here's my sergeant and my squad. He's a Blood Angel, so his squad gets the Blood Angel rules.
Exactly.
But you do that once, and that's fine. So maybe, I don't know, you make that a warlord tray or whatever. But as soon as you start doing that on every unit of your army, and I've got 6 different kill teams, and your opponent's having to lean across the table and squint and go, what shoulder pad has that guy got on? It just becomes it becomes too much, basically. So you need to find a good middle ground. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought the Imperial Fist carrying the bolt gun was the sergeant. Oh, no, it's the guy with the hammer now. But yeah, I think those are kind of my suggestions for how I would change Deathwatch. And I do hope something changes because, as I said, as soon as they're not really bad, I'll be playing them again. But for the meantime, it is Grey Knights only.
I think that this is the difference between the kind of two, really. Skitarii and Cult Mech, they seem like they don't seem that far away from being good or kind of manageable, where Deathwatch just seems so far behind in terms of what
it was what they I remember watching one of the what they called the kind of meta videos that Games Workshop does, where they kind of do the little behind the scenes chats, and I remember someone did actually in that bring up Deathwatch, and even they kind of just openly admitted, we've not done any changes because we don't know what to do yet. And I hope in the next lot don't get me wrong, I doubt they'll figure it out, but try something. That's all I'm asking.
Which is what they've done with AdMech.
Yeah.
And this is what you kind of mentioned earlier, that they've tried a bunch of stuff, both to reduce their power and increase their power. I feel with Deathwatch, they've just been a bit forgotten about, really.
Yeah,
sadly.
I think it's definitely the case of all the extra rules and stuff they added onto Space Marines and all the buffs. At first glance, looked amazing for Deathwatch. You actually peel back a couple of the layers. You look at the Codex Warfare not being a thing. You look at your 27-point guys whose job is solely to die. And suddenly it all kind of just falls apart. And that's sort of what happened. They've gone from being a decent army, and if you know how to play them well, they can perform very well, to you can know how to play them very well, but at the end of the day, you're just playing Marines with more rules that aren't great.
And, I want to leave everyone with a positive, don't worry, it won't be too bad. And I think, with AdMech, this is what I'm saying, we're almost there. You could play them, you can do okay. Regardless of their win rate this week, we're going to hold that to maybe an anomaly. But with Deathwatch, I really want to be like, just keep running Deathwatch. There'll be a list out there that you can run.
But that's what I said at the start, right? There are still a couple of people playing them and doing decently, but those are the very best players of Deathwatch. I should know, they all fucking beat me last year. But even they've gone from sort of scoring top 3s at massive JTs to scoring top 10s, which to me kind of shows that they've fallen off. And in other cases, like me, the filthy meta Jason that I am, have just decided to stop playing them entirely. Well, it's just not worth the hassle of having your army that you've spent loads of time learning, and then its rules just don't pop off and you lose anyway.
No, this is it. And you did stick with them for a long time.
You're damn right I did.
And you did have some pretty good tournament results.
Yeah, I mean, I last year in the ITC, I finished 4th in the world and 2nd in the UK, so it's not bad. Yeah. But yeah, I just don't have the energy for it, to be honest. No, I don't have the energy to play an army that's got a whole bunch of rules I got to know that all can. You have this plan in your mind of, right, if I do this and this and this on this turn, and then I make these saves, and then I do this, and then it all comes together and I win. Whereas in reality, it's you do all that, and then you're just as good as every other army.
It's a load of hoops to jump through to just try and compete.
Yep, exactly, and that's kind of why I've just can't bother really.
Yeah, I get it. It's hard work.
Yeah. But I kind of hope we've kind of gone over everything that I wanted to go over with Deathwatch. Gone over everything you wanted to kind of go over with AdMech. And I think these kind of videos where it's not looking at here's the latest meta cheese, it's looking at here are the armies that are struggling, here is why, and here is what you could do to fix them. I think these videos, especially because for a lot of people who, all right, you own your you own your Iron Hands. You're playing because you either love them and they're doing really well and it's great anyway, or the flip side of that is you, like me, you own your Deathwatch. You've spent ages painting them. You love them. You love the lore. They're your favorite army, and they're just kind of bad, and it's a bit of a feels bad.
Because you don't want to live through a year or 2 years of
them being bad. Yeah,
they're just bad,
yeah.
We're fortunate enough to have several armies we can pivot to, but some people really, really want to play that one army.
Yep.
It just doesn't feel good.
No.
It's not.
No. And I think in the future, I'd definitely like to do kind of more of these episodes, and especially when we can, more with a focus aspect, with AdMech, as you were saying, what you can do to make them a bit better, sort of ways you could build the army, all that kind of stuff, is definitely something I'd like to include, because it kind of, as you said, like, it feels bad if your army is bad, and focusing on sort of the mid tiers and the high tiers and saying this is how you make a good army even better is one thing, but being able to sort of say, right, your army's not great, but this is what you can do to make it better, I think a lot of people are going to enjoy a lot.
No, definitely. And I think, don't get me wrong, if AdMech and Deathwatch start doing a lot better, we'll be doing another one of these videos and saying, hey,
yep,
we were wrong.
Yep.
They're actually fine.
Exactly. It's the thing, right? It's what you said. I would love to be proved wrong. I would love next weekend someone to take Deathwatch and win. I don't even know what GTs are on next weekend, but take Deathwatch and win one of them. I'd love it.
Super Major this weekend?
Say again?
I think Southampton Super Major for the UKTC.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
If they win, if it's an AdMech Deathwatch final, we're going to be doing a video next week where we're
I hope so, but I can't see it. Yeah, I hope so, but I can't see it. But yeah, in terms of next weekend from us, where are we next weekend? We're at St Albans, aren't we? We're at the St Albans Slam.
They've got big series of RTTs this year, which I've signed up to a lot already.
Yeah, same. Even though they sell out in minutes,
they do sell out very quick.
So we'll be attending that next weekend. Hopefully, either there's be some new rules come out or something like that, or else we'll probably just be talking about our kind of results from the tournament. You're running Necrons, right? You're running Sautek?
I'm running Sautek Necrons, which
actually. Yep, and I will be running the same as last weekend. I'll be running Grey Knights. A couple of little changes, but obviously we'll hopefully have a video next week out for you guys about sort of our results from the tournament, how our lists went, how the kind of meta looked, and all that kind of usual stuff. But otherwise, from me, I've not really got anything else. James, are you all good? You sort of covered everything you want to cover?
Can't wait to get beaten by Liam and his World Eaters on Saturday.
Sure, I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. But otherwise, from us, that's kind of the end of it, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope we covered some of the stuff you were sort of looking to see covered when you saw the contents of the video. And otherwise, we will hopefully see a lot of you back again next week for next week's episode.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys. See you in a bit.